I want to ask you something before I start. If you're driving alone on a highway in the middle of Texas in July at 2 in the afternoon, and you see a man standing on the shoulder with his thumb out, no bag, no sign, just a man in jeans and a gray t-shirt standing in the heat with his arm out, what do you see? Because I'll tell you what I saw. I saw a man who needed a ride. That's it. That's the whole picture I had when I slowed the Peterbilt down and pulled onto the shoulder and opened the passenger door and said, "Where you headed?" I had been driving commercially for 4 months. 4 months, which in this industry is nothing, less than nothing. It's the point where you're still learning things you don't even know you don't know yet. I had my CDLA, I had a contract with a regional carrier out of San Antonio called Lone Star Freight, and I had exactly the level of confidence that 4 months gives you, enough to feel capable, not enough to be right about everything. That combination is its own kind of dangerous, and I know that now in a way I did not know it that July afternoon on the I-10 westbound between Beaumont and Houston, when I saw the man on the shoulder and made a decision that I have spent a lot of time since then turning over in my hands. His name was Caleb. That's what he told me. Caleb, no last name offered, and I didn't ask. Because at 26 years old with 4 months of driving experience, I didn't yet understand that a man on the shoulder of the I-10 in July with no bag and no sign and no last name is a specific kind of situation, and specific kinds of situations deserve specific kinds of attention. I opened the door and he climbed in, and the first thing I noticed, the thing I noticed and filed and did not examine closely enough, was that he moved fast. Not hurried fast, not anxious fast, efficient fast. The kind of fast that means someone has thought about the sequence of actions required to get into a truck cab and has done it before, many times, and has no wasted motion. He was in the seat and the door was closed before I had fully processed that he was moving. "Appreciate it," he said, low voice, unhurried, a Gulf Coast accent, not Texas, further east, Louisiana, maybe, or Mississippi. "Sure," I said. "I'm going to San Antonio." That works. If you're the kind of person who listens to stories like this, if you found this channel because you know that the road has a way of putting things in your path that you didn't plan for, subscribe right now before I go any further, because what happened in the next 6 hours inside that Peterbilt cab is something I've tried to tell 3 different people and never gotten all the way through without stopping. This is the first time I'm going to tell it complete. I pulled back onto the I-10 westbound. The Texas heat was the kind that makes the air visible, that shimmer off the asphalt that turns the road ahead into a mirage, the sky so white with it that the horizon disappears. July in Southeast Texas is not like heat anywhere else I've been. It's not dry heat. It's not the kind that bakes. It's the kind that presses, humid and total, like the air itself has weight. The AC in the Peterbilt was running hard and keeping up, but the moment Caleb had opened the door, the outside had come in. That wall of hot, wet air that Southeast Texas throws at you, and it took the cab 3 minutes to recover. Those first 20 miles, I was doing what I always did on the open stretch between Beaumont and the Houston sprawl, running the numbers. Not financial numbers, road numbers. The math that a driver runs continuously without deciding to run it, the background calculation that never fully stops, current speed versus delivery window, fuel level versus next stop, load weight distribution versus the grade change coming up past the Barbers Hill exit. Weather. The sky was white with heat, but unbroken. No afternoon storm building to the southeast, the way they sometimes do in July off the Gulf, which was good because a Southeast Texas thunderstorm on the I-10 is the kind of thing that costs you 45 minutes and a lot of concentration. I was aware of Caleb the way you're aware of something at the edge of your vision. Present, noted, not demanding attention. That's how it works with a quiet passenger. They become part of the cab environment, like the AC noise or the CB static, something your nervous system registers and classifies as non-threatening and then files. What I wasn't doing in those first 20 miles was asking the questions I should have been asking. No bag, no sign, no last name, no explanation of where he'd come from or how he'd gotten to that particular stretch of shoulder on that particular afternoon. A man doesn't appear on the I-10 outside Beaumont in July with nothing in his hands because things are going well for him. That's not a complicated observation. It doesn't require experience to make. It just requires the habit of asking the next question, and at 4 months in, I hadn't built that habit yet. Ray Diaz used to say, the information is always there. You just have to be in the practice of looking for it. He wasn't talking about Hitchhiker specifically. He was talking about loads, about manifests, about the difference between a truck stop that's running well and one that's about to have a problem. But the principle is the same. The information was there, in the cab, from the first minute. I just wasn't in the practice yet. I was 20 miles down the road before I said anything at all. Caleb said nothing for the first 20 miles. This didn't bother me at the time. I'd had quiet rides before, regional deliveries where a lumper or a yard worker caught a ride for a few exits and sat in silence the whole way, which was fine, which was normal. I was focused on the road, on the load. A dry van freight of retail merchandise, nothing complicated. Houston to San Antonio, standard run for Lone Star, and on the CB, which I kept at low volume on Channel 19, the way my trainer had told me to. Always keep an ear on the channel, Ray, you never know. My trainer's name was Ray. I keep calling the CB habit his because that's where I learned it, and habits have a parentage the same way people do. Around mile marker 726, somewhere past Katy and into the outer sprawl of Houston, Caleb said, "You been driving long?" "Few months," I said. He looked at me. I could feel it without turning my head. The quality of attention that someone gives you when your answer has told them something they were calculating. "Like it?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "I do." And I meant it. 4 months in, I still had the feeling that the road was giving me something. Space, motion, the clean logic of point A to point B, that I hadn't found anywhere else. I'd spent 2 years after high school doing warehouse work in Corpus Christi, which was fine, which paid, and then my uncle had suggested I look at getting my CDL because he'd driven for 20 years and said it suited a certain kind of person, the kind that didn't mind being alone and didn't need to be told what to do every hour. I took the test in February. I was on the road by March. And by July, driving the I-10 through the Houston sprawl with a stranger in the passenger seat, I was still in the phase where the job felt like the right shape for who I was. Caleb looked back at the road. "Good work," he said. "Honest work." Something in how he said it, not the words, the cadence, made me glance at him for the first time since he'd gotten in. He was looking straight ahead, hands in his lap, completely still. He had a quality of stillness that I associated at 26 with older men, the kind of stillness you develop when you've spent a long time inside your own head and learned to make it comfortable in there. He looked about 40, maybe older. Hard to say because his face had the quality of a face that had been through weather, not just sun, but the kind of weather that's made of things that happen to you. "You from around here?" I said. I don't know why I asked. Conversation, maybe. The cab felt quieter than I wanted it to be. "Used to be," he said. That was the whole answer. The silence after "used to be" lasted long enough that I stopped expecting him to add anything to it. That's one of the things you learn in a cab, how to read the weight of a silence. Some silences are comfortable, the kind that two people arrive at naturally when they've run out of small things to say and haven't yet decided if they want to say the larger things. Some silences are loaded. This one had weight to it, but not hostility. More like a door that was closed but not locked. I left it alone for about 10 miles. Then, because I was 26 and because the road west of Beaumont is flat enough that it doesn't require much of you and your mind starts filling the space, I said, "You headed somewhere specific in San Antonio or just west?" "West is fine," he said. "I can drop you at the 35 interchange. From there, you can catch something north or south easy." "That works. Another mile." "You eat?" I said. "I've got protein bars behind the seat if you need something before Columbus." He looked at me, that same assessing quality. "I'm fine," he said. "Thank you." The thank you was formal in a way that the rest of his speech wasn't. Like it came from a different register, the register you use with people you're not sure about yet or people you owe something to and don't want to owe. We passed a road sign for Beaumont city limits, then another for the county line, and the landscape started its slow transition from the pine forests of East Texas toward the coastal plain. The trees thinned, the elevation flattened further, the sky got bigger. I'd only driven this stretch 4 times, but I'd already started to feel the specific logic of it. The way the land changes in this part of Texas is gradual enough that you don't notice any single moment of change. You just arrive somewhere different from where you started without being able to say exactly when the transition happened. "What's the load?" Caleb said. "Retail merchandise, dry van, nothing complicated." "Good weight?" "Legal and balanced." I paused. "You know freight?" He was quiet for a moment. "Worked a dock for a few years, long time ago." "Loading or receiving?" "Both. Nights, mostly." He looked at the passing landscape. "It's honest work. You learn which drivers take care of the equipment and which ones don't. You can tell by how they pull in." "How do you tell?" "Speed of the approach," he said. "A driver who respects the dock slows down early and comes in straight. A driver who doesn't care comes in hot and corrects at the end." He paused. "You came in slow." I almost asked when he'd seen me pull in, then realized he meant earlier, the way I'd pulled onto the shoulder to pick him up. He'd watched the approach. He'd been evaluating me before I'd said a word. I didn't know what to do with that, so I kept driving. "Why'd you stop?" he said. It wasn't hostile, genuinely curious, the kind of question that wants an honest answer rather than a polite one. "You needed a ride," I said. "Lots of people need things," he said. "Not everyone stops." "I know." I watched the road. "I don't have a good reason. I just did." He nodded slowly, like that was the answer he'd expected, and it confirmed something he'd already decided. "That'll change," he said. "The road changes that." "You think?" "I know." He said it without bitterness, as observation, not warning. Not because you become a bad person, because you learn to calculate. You start running the numbers before you do anything. It's faster. Usually it's right. He paused. "Sometimes what it costs you is the thing you didn't calculate." I didn't answer. We drove for a while in the silence that came after that, which was a different quality of silence from the one before, fuller somehow. The kind that comes after something true has been said, and both people know it. The Houston sprawl started appearing on the horizon around mile marker 730, the distant haze of a city, the way large cities announce themselves before you can see any specific building, just a thickening of the air and a change in the quality of the light. I reached over and turned the CB volume up slightly, the way Ray had taught me to do when traffic started getting complex. "That's Houston," I said. "I know," Caleb said. "I've been through it before." We passed through Houston on the I-10, which in July at 3 in the afternoon is a specific kind of ordeal. The interchange where the 610 meets the I-10 is one of the most complex pieces of highway in the country, and in a Peterbilt with a loaded trailer, it requires full attention, no distractions, mirrors constantly, speed moderate, lane changes deliberate. I went quiet and focused on the road, and Caleb seemed to understand without being told that this was not a time for talking, and he sat without moving or speaking for the full 40 minutes it took to clear the city and get back to open road on the other side. When the Houston skyline was behind us and the road opened up westbound into the flat country between the city and San Antonio, I let out a breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. "That's the part of this job nobody tells you about," I said. "The Houston interchange? The concentrating, how much you have to concentrate sometimes, and then it's over and you realize you were that focused for 40 straight minutes." Caleb looked at me. This time I caught it, a full look, not the peripheral one. "You're going to be good at this," he said. It's a strange thing to be told by a stranger. Stranger still that I believed him. Not because I had reason to trust his judgment, but because something in how he said it had the weight of an observation rather than a compliment. Like he'd been watching me work for those 40 minutes and had reached a conclusion. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said thanks and kept driving. We stopped at a truck stop in Columbus, about halfway between Houston and San Antonio. I needed to fuel, and I needed to use the restroom, and I needed 5 minutes outside the cab, which is something the body requires on a long run, whether or not the mind thinks it needs it. I told Caleb I'd be 20 minutes. He said he'd wait. The Flying J in Columbus is a full-service stop. Fuel, diner, showers, the whole structure of a place designed to serve people who live on the road. I fueled first, then went inside. The diner was quiet for mid-afternoon. 2 drivers at separate tables, a family in a booth who had the look of people who'd taken a wrong exit and found themselves here by accident. I got a coffee and a sandwich I didn't fully taste and sat at the counter for exactly the 5 minutes I'd allowed myself. The woman behind the counter, her name tag said Gloria, and she had the particular efficiency of someone who had worked that counter long enough to read a driver's state of mind from how they sat down. Put my coffee in front of me without my asking for a refill. Long run? She said. San Antonio, I said. Had a pickup in Beaumont. Straight shot then. She wiped the counter. You're almost there. Yeah, I paused. I picked up a hitchhiker outside Beaumont. I don't know why I said it. It came out without planning, the way things come out when something is sitting in your chest and you haven't named it yet. Gloria looked at me, not alarmed, assessing. He's still in the truck? Yeah. You know him? No, just a guy on the shoulder. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you eating fast or slow? Fast, I said. Then I won't say what I was going to say. She moved to the other end of the counter. I ate the sandwich. The thing she wasn't going to say sat in the space where she'd been standing, and I felt it without being able to articulate it. The shape of a concern I didn't yet have the experience to name on my own. I paid and went back to the truck. Caleb was exactly where I'd left him. Seat position unchanged, hands in the same place in his lap, looking at the windshield. He hadn't opened the glove box, hadn't adjusted anything, hadn't left any mark on the cab. He was a man who had learned to take up no space, and that, I thought about this later, much later, is not something most people learn by accident. Good coffee, he said when I got in. Decent, I said. I pulled out of the Columbus Flying J at 4:47 p.m. The CB crackled as I got back on the I-10, a westbound driver somewhere ahead of me reporting construction slowdown near Luling, right lane closed, expect a 15-minute delay. I noted it and adjusted my mental ETA. The delivery window in San Antonio didn't close until 8 p.m. I had room. The country west of Columbus is different from the country east of Houston. East of Houston is flat and green and thick with humidity, the kind of landscape that feels enclosed even when you can see for miles because the sky presses down on it. West of Columbus it opens differently, drier, the vegetation lower and more spread out, the sky becoming something you're aware of as a separate element rather than just the ceiling. The light in the late afternoon out there has a specific color that I've tried to describe to people who haven't seen it and never quite gotten right. It's gold, but not warm gold. It's a thin gold, like gold that's been stretched too far, like the sun is working harder than it should to cover that much empty space. Caleb looked at the window for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, I grew up about 40 miles north of here. I waited, not pushing, just leaving space the way you leave space for a load to settle before you check the straps. Small town, he said. You wouldn't know it. Try me. He named a town I'd never heard of, which in that part of Texas is not unusual. There are towns out there that exist on maps and on road signs and almost nowhere else, collections of a few hundred people built around a grain elevator or a livestock operation that the highway bypasses completely. Never been, I said. Not much reason to. He paused. My mother still lives there, I think. That landed somewhere in my chest and I didn't show it, and I kept my eyes on the road. 2 words that carry the specific weight of someone who has been away long enough that the basic facts of the people they left behind have become uncertain. You heading back that way? I said. No, he said. Just that. No elaboration. The CB crackled again. Channel 19, a voice I didn't recognize. Westbound I-10 near Seguin, blue and white at the rest area, running plates on everyone coming off. Just a heads up. blue and white. Law enforcement. I noted it. Standard practice. Way stations and rest area checks are part of the road. You note them and you keep your paperwork clean and you don't worry about them when you've got nothing to worry about. I had nothing to worry about. My logs were current, my load was correct, my registration was in order. I looked at Caleb. He was very still, not the same still as before, not the relaxed stillness of a man comfortable in his own head. This was a different quality, held, the way a thing is still when it's working very hard at being still. You hear that? I said. Casual, genuinely casual. I was still not understanding what I was looking at. Yeah, he said. I heard it. He was looking straight ahead. His hands, which had been loose in his lap for the last 3 hours, were now flat on his thighs. I noticed that. I noticed it, and still didn't connect it to what it was. We drove for another 8 miles. Then Caleb said, "Can I ask you something?" Sure. If you knew something about someone that would cause them serious trouble, but the something was old and the person was different now, what would you do with that? I kept my eyes on the road. My hands were steady on the wheel. But something in my chest shifted, the way a load shifts when the road changes grade, a subtle redistribution of weight that you feel before you understand it. Depends, I said, on what the something was. Yeah, he said. That's the right answer. He went quiet again. We passed the rest area near Seguin. There were 2 state trooper vehicles parked at the entrance. I kept my speed steady, 63 miles per hour, same as I'd been running the whole route, and I watched the troopers in my mirror as I passed. They were at the entrance, not flagging traffic, not pulling anyone over. Presence, not enforcement. In my mirror, I watched Caleb's reflection in the passenger side window. He was watching the troopers too, and when the rest area was behind us and the troopers were out of sight, I watched something release in his shoulders. Very small, very controlled. But there, I drove for another mile before I said anything. Caleb, I said, what's your last name? A pause. 5 seconds, maybe 6. Does it matter? He said. It might, I said. Another pause. Longer. Broussard, he said. Caleb Broussard. I didn't recognize it. At 26, with 4 months of driving experience and no particular reason to have memorized the names of people the law was looking for, I didn't recognize it. But I had a smartphone in the cup holder, and I had a delivery that was 90 minutes out, and I had a stop I was going to have to make for fuel on the edge of San Antonio. And I had, sitting somewhere under everything else, the thing Gloria at the Columbus Flying J had not said. At the next fuel stop, a truck stop on the east side of San Antonio, the kind of place that's been there since the highway was built and shows it, with pumps that work and a diner that's better than it looks. I told Caleb I was going to be inside longer this time. Maintenance paperwork, I said. Could take a half hour. He looked at me, and this time the look was different from all the other looks. This was the look of a man who has spent enough time reading situations to know when a situation has changed. Okay, he said. I went inside. I went to the back corner of the diner, where the signal was good and the angle to the window let me see the truck. I sat down and I searched the name. Caleb Broussard, 43 years old, Covington, Louisiana. The results came up in order of relevance, and the most relevant one was a news article from 8 months ago, from a Covington paper with a photograph of the man I had in my passenger seat. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time because I wanted to be certain I was understanding correctly, and by the third reading, I was certain. He was wanted in connection with a warehouse fire in Louisiana, not arson for profit. The investigation had indicated an argument, a confrontation with a business partner, a fire that started in a way the investigators said was not accidental. The business partner had survived. The business partner had given a statement. Caleb Broussard had been gone before the investigation reached its conclusion. 8 months. I sat in the back corner of that truck stop diner with my phone on the table and the article on the screen, and the sound of a grill running in the kitchen behind me, and I thought about what I knew and what I didn't. What I knew, the name, the article, the photograph, the 8 months. What I didn't know, what had actually happened in that warehouse, in the way you can't know a thing like that from an article in a regional paper. I didn't know what the business partner had said, or what the argument had been about, or what the fire had consumed besides inventory and certainty. I didn't know if Caleb Broussard was the thing the article said he was, or if he was the thing he'd seemed to be in my passenger seat for the last 6 hours, a man who had been somewhere hard and was not the same person who had arrived there. I knew what my trainer would have said. I knew what my carrier's policy was. I knew what the CB had said about blue and white near Seguin, and I knew what Caleb's shoulders had done when that rest area was behind us. I called 911. I told them who I was, where I was, what I had, and what I'd found. The dispatcher was professional and clear. She told me to stay inside, away from the truck. Units were 12 minutes out. I sat in that diner for 12 minutes. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink. Gloria from Columbus had been right about the thing she wasn't going to say, and I didn't need to be told that now to feel the shape of it. When I saw the units pull into the lot, I went to the window. Caleb was still in the truck, still in the seat. He hadn't run. I watched 2 officers approach the passenger side, watched the door open, watched Caleb step down from the cab with his hands already raised. Not fast, not dramatic, with the same efficient economy of motion he'd used to get into the truck 6 hours earlier. He said something to the officers that I couldn't hear through the glass. One of the officers responded, and then they walked him to the unit, and that was that. Before they put him in, he turned and looked at the diner window. I don't know if he could see me behind the glass. The angle was wrong, the light was wrong. But he turned and he looked, and then he looked away, and they put him in the car. I stood there for a moment after the units left. The truck sat at the pump with the passenger door still hanging open, the way he'd left it. The cab was empty in a way that cabs aren't usually empty, not just unoccupied, but recently vacated, the shape of the last few hours still in the air. I went and finished fueling. I closed the passenger door. I ran my pre-departure check, noted the mileage in my log, confirmed the delivery ETA with dispatch. Then I pulled out of the fuel stop and got back on the I-10 westbound toward San Antonio. The delivery went fine. I made the window with an hour and 20 minutes to spare. The receiving dock manager signed the paperwork without incident. I parked in the lot, completed my log for the day, and sat in the cab for a while before starting the drive back to the Lone Star Yard. The passenger seat was exactly as it always was. Clean, adjusted to the position I'd set it at months ago, nothing out of place. Caleb Broussard had been in that seat for 6 hours and left no mark on it. I don't know why that got to me, but it did. The specific invisibility of it. I thought about what he'd asked me. If you knew something about someone that would cause them serious trouble, but the something was old and the person was different now, what would you do with that? I'd said. Depends on what the something was, and that was the right answer. I still think it's the right answer. The something was what it was, and it was not nothing. A fire, a survivor, a statement, 8 months on the road. I did what the right answer required, but I also thought about his voice when he'd said I grew up about 40 miles north of here, and I think, those 2 words, and the way his shoulders had held themselves through the Seguin rest area. A man running from something is not always running from what you think. Sometimes they're running from who they were when the something happened, which is a different kind of running, and a harder one, because you can't outrun that, no matter how many state lines you cross. I don't say this to make what he did smaller. I say it because that cab was mine for 6 hours and his for 6 hours, and in 6 hours you learn things about a person that you can't unknow. I knew he was tired, not road tired, the other kind. The kind that comes from carrying something a long distance without being able to put it down. I've done 2 more years of driving since that July. I'm not a novice anymore, not an expert either, but past the point where I don't know what I don't know. I pick up a lot more from faces now, from the way a person moves when they get into a cab, from what they do with their hands, from what they don't say. I don't know if I would have read Caleb Broussard differently with 2 more years of road on me. Maybe, maybe not. What I know is this: I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Not because I'm afraid of who they might be, but because I learned that day that I'm not ready for who they might be. That's not a permanent condition. It's just where I am right now, and the road has a way of telling you clearly where you are if you pay attention. The I-10 west of Columbus has that thin gold light in the late afternoon, the light that's been stretched too far. I drive through it regularly now on runs between Houston and San Antonio, and every time I pass that stretch, I think about a man who said he used to be from 40 miles north of there and turned his head to look at the landscape with the expression of someone doing a calculation they already know the answer to. I don't know what happened to Caleb Broussard after the unit pulled out of that parking lot. I haven't searched the name again. There's a version of that story that ends somewhere I'd rather not know about, and there's a version that ends differently, and I've decided that not knowing is the right size for what it is. The passenger seat is still clean. The cab is still mine. I keep the CB on channel 19. I note the blue and white when they're reported. I run clean, I log clean, and I make my windows. That's what 4 months on the road turned into. That's what it cost me, and what it gave me, and what it left in the passenger seat that I can still feel on long runs when the road gets quiet and the late afternoon light turns that specific color and the horizon does its disappearing act in the Texas heat. If you stayed with me all the way to San Antonio, thank you for riding along. Drop a comment before you go. What would you have done at that fuel stop? I genuinely don't know if I made the right call in the way that matters. I made the legal call. Those aren't always the same thing. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. The next story is a different road, a different driver, a different kind of weight. But the cab is always the same size. Roll safe. There are things I left out of that story the first time I told it, because the first time I told it, I was still inside it. Still close enough that the shape of it hadn't settled into something I could see whole. Let me go back and fill those in, because they matter for understanding what that day actually was. I want to start with why I was on the I-10 in July in the first place. Not the logistics, the Beaumont pickup, the San Antonio delivery, but why I was the driver. Why it was me on that stretch of highway on that particular afternoon. My trainer at Lone Star Freight was a man named Ray Diaz, 61 years old, from Laredo originally. 23 years of driving behind him when he took me on as his student. Ray was the kind of trainer who didn't explain things unless you asked, which meant you had to ask the right questions, which meant you had to know enough to know what you didn't know. That's a narrow gate, and I spent the first 6 weeks of training walking into it repeatedly. Ray had a system for solo runs. He didn't put new drivers on solo until he was satisfied, and satisfied for Ray meant something specific. He put you on a short solo run, 2 hours, nothing complicated, and he watched the logbook when you came back, not the mileage, not the delivery confirmation, the logbook. Because how you log tells you how a driver thinks, and how a driver thinks is what determines whether they'll still be driving in 5 years or whether they'll be a cautionary story someone tells at a truck stop. He cleared me for solo in late June. The Beaumont run was my 4th solo, which tells you something about where I was. Capable enough to be trusted with a solo load, not experienced enough to know what capable enough means in practice. The morning of the Beaumont run, I'd called my mother from the Lone Star yard before I pulled out. She lives in Corpus Christi, where I grew up. She and my stepfather, a quiet man named Dennis who fixes HVAC systems and has never said a difficult word to anyone in his life. My mother has driven approximately 40 miles from Corpus Christi in the last decade, and the concept of driving a loaded Peterbilt across the state of Texas is to her approximately as comprehensible as navigating by the stars. She understands that I have a job, that the job involves a truck, and that the truck is large. She asked if I had enough food in the cab. I told her I had protein bars and a thermos of coffee. She asked if that was enough. I told her it was fine, Mom. I'll eat at a truck stop. She told me to be careful, and I told her I would, and I meant it in the way that 26-year-olds mean it when they say it, accurately but incompletely, because at 26 you understand careful to mean drive the speed limit, don't fall asleep, check your mirrors. You don't yet understand all the things the road considers when it decides whether to be careful with you. I thought about that call, sitting in the back corner of the San Antonio truck stop diner waiting for the units. My mother had asked if I had enough food. She had not asked if I would pick up hitchhikers, because it would not have occurred to her to ask that, because it would not have occurred to her that I would do it. And I had done it not out of recklessness, but out of a genuinely uncomplicated impulse. A man needed a ride. I had room. The math seemed simple. The math is never as simple as it seems. That's one of the things the road teaches you, and it teaches it differently to everybody. What Ray Diaz would have said, if I'd told him. He would have looked at me for a long time without speaking, which was his way of giving you the space to hear yourself. Then he would have said something short. Ray never used more words than a thing required. I think he would have said, "You made a decision with incomplete information and you corrected it when you got more. That's the job." And then he would have moved on, because Ray didn't dwell. I called Ray that evening after the delivery, parked in the Lone Star Yard in San Antonio. It was past 9 p.m. He answered because Ray answered calls from his drivers at any hour, which was one of the things about him that I didn't understand the full value of until much later. I told him the whole thing. He listened without interrupting, which for Ray was the equivalent of sitting very still and paying full attention. When I finished, there was a pause. "You logged the pickup?" he said. "No," I said. "I didn't know I was supposed to." "You're not supposed to pick up hitchhikers, company policy. But since you didn't know that in a way that matters, we'll address it going forward." Another pause. "You called when you found out who he was?" "Yes. That's what counts. A beat. Get some sleep. You've got to run to Laredo on Thursday." That was it. No lecture, no performance of disappointment, no extended processing of the moral weight of the afternoon. Ray Diaz understood something about the road that I was still learning, that the decisions you make in the moment are made with what you have in the moment, and the work is to keep improving what you have, not to retroactively punish yourself for the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. I've thought about that call a lot, about what Ray didn't say as much as what he said. Now let me tell you about the part of the drive where I almost figured it out before Columbus. Somewhere around the Katy interchange, that 40-minute concentration zone where Houston demands everything you have, there was a moment. We were in the left lane, running steady at the speed of the surrounding traffic, and a highway patrol unit passed us on the right shoulder. Not lights, not moving fast, just a cruiser sitting on the shoulder with its engine running the way they do when they're watching traffic rather than responding to something. Standard presence. And Caleb's right hand moved, small movement. He brought it from his lap to his thigh, which is nothing. A shift in position, the kind you make 100 times on a long ride. But the timing was the thing. The hand moved at the exact moment the cruiser became visible and returned to the lap position exactly as we passed it. I registered it somewhere below the level of conscious thought, filed it in the place where things go when you're managing 40 minutes of Houston interchange and don't have processing space for peripheral information. That's the thing about experience. An experienced driver, Ray, someone with 10 years on the road, would have caught it. Would have caught it and known what it was, and had a different conversation with Caleb somewhere around Katy, or pulled off at the first exit and said, "Get out," politely, firmly, the way you handle a situation before it becomes a situation. I wasn't experienced enough to catch it consciously. My body caught it and my brain was busy. I'm not telling you this to beat myself up over it. I'm telling you because it's true, and because true things about the road are the only things worth carrying. After the Columbus stop, after Gloria and the sandwich and the thing she didn't say, I got back in the truck and I was different. Not dramatically. From the outside, nothing had changed. But internally, the place where I stored information about Caleb Broussard had rearranged itself, and I was driving with a different quality of attention than I'd had before. I noticed, for instance, that his shoes were wrong for someone who'd been hitchhiking in Texas heat. They were work boots, good ones, the kind that cost real money with composite toes and the specific wear pattern of someone who spends time on concrete floors rather than asphalt shoulders. A man who'd been walking the shoulder in July in Texas would have had lighter shoes, or his feet would have shown the kind of heat damage you get from dark boots in that sun. His feet were fine, which meant he hadn't been walking long, which meant the shoulder of the I-10 outside Beaumont was not where his day had started. I sat with that, the shoes, the wear pattern, the absence of road damage, and I kept my eyes on the I-10 and my speed at 63 and my face in the expression that I hoped looked like nothing in particular. Caleb was looking at the window. The country west of Columbus was doing its thing, opening up, going drier, the light thinning into that gold that belongs specifically to late afternoon in that part of Texas. He'd been looking at the landscape on and off since we'd cleared Houston, with the attention of someone who recognizes a place without belonging to it anymore. After a few miles, he said, "Something changed in Columbus." I didn't look at him. "What do you mean?" "You came back from inside different." He wasn't accusatory. He was stating it the way you state a road condition, factually, without drama. "Not much, but different." "Long stop," I said. "Needed the brake." He didn't push it. He went back to the window. Another 5 miles. The road hummed under the tires. The AC held the cab at a temperature that was completely disconnected from the reality outside, where the thermometer on the mirror still read 91 degrees, even at 5 in the afternoon. Then Caleb said, "Can I tell you something?" "Sure. I'm not going to cause you any trouble." He said it quietly, without looking away from the window. "Whatever you're thinking, I'm not going to do anything. I just need to get somewhere, and this was the only way I had." I held the wheel, kept the speed steady. The road ahead was straight and empty and offered no decision points. "I'm not thinking anything specific," I said. "Okay," he said. He knew that was not entirely true, and I knew he knew. And we both let that sit between us in the cab, in the particular honesty that sometimes happens when two people are moving at 63 miles per hour through open country, and there's nowhere to go and nothing to do but be in the same space. "You have people out here?" I said. I don't know why I asked. Maybe because he'd said the thing about his mother, I think, and it had stayed with me. "Not really," he said. "Not anymore." "Family?" He was quiet for a moment. "I had a brother. We weren't close at the end." He paused. He'd probably say that's my fault. He'd probably be right. "Where is he now?" "Baton Rouge. Still at the same place he always was. Same job, same neighborhood. That's the kind of man he is. He stays." He looked at his hands, which were resting in his lap. I never could do that. Stay, even when I should have. I thought about my uncle who'd told me to get my CDL. My uncle had been the same way. He'd driven for 20 years, the road being the answer to something he couldn't name. He'd told me once that some people are built for staying and some people are built for moving, and the trouble starts when a person who's built for moving tries to stay in one place long enough to build something. The thing they build is always slightly wrong, like a house framed by someone who doesn't quite understand level. My uncle said something like that, I said, about people who move and people who stay. Caleb looked at me. "Which one are you?" "I don't know yet," I said. "I've only been doing this 4 months." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but the closest thing I'd seen from him. The lines around his eyes changed. "4 months," he said. "You've got time to figure it out. What about you?" He looked back out the window. The answer didn't come for a long time, long enough that I thought it wasn't going to come at all. Then, "I think I always knew," he said. "I just spent a long time pretending I didn't." The CB crackled. A westbound driver reporting construction near Luling. I noted it, adjusted my mental ETA, and kept driving. Caleb went back to the window, and the thin gold light and whatever calculation he was running inside that stillness of his. I didn't say anything else for a while. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be heard by someone who's paying attention. I was paying attention. I'm not sure it helped him, but it was what I had. I sat with that for a while and kept driving. The CB had something to do with it too. After Columbus, I had the volume up slightly more than usual, not dramatically, just enough that I was catching more of the channel traffic. Most of it was routine. A slowdown on the westbound near Seguin. A fuel price update from a driver who'd just come through Luling, the ordinary back and forth of a working highway. But around mile marker 650, a voice I didn't recognize said something that I almost missed because it was brief, and the channel moved on quickly. Anybody westbound see a white Peterbilt out of Lone Star? Looking for a passenger they may have picked up east of Beaumont. I didn't respond. I don't know who was transmitting. A law enforcement relay through a dispatcher, another driver who'd picked up something on the scanner, someone with information and a CB and the practice of using Channel 19 the way it was designed to be used. I clicked the mic once, which is the CB equivalent of "I heard you," and I kept driving. Caleb didn't react. He may not have been listening. He may have heard and given nothing away. I don't know. But after that transmission, the remaining miles to the San Antonio fuel stop had a different quality. I knew what I was going to find when I searched the name. I was just giving myself the driving time to be certain before I acted on it, which is something Ray had taught me. Don't make a decision until you have to, and when you have to, make it clean. I made it clean. At the fuel stop, in the back corner of the diner, I searched Caleb Broussard and I read the article, and I called 911 and I told them exactly what I had and where I was. The dispatcher asked me to describe the man in the truck. I described him. Age, build, gray t-shirt, work boots with composite toes. And she said units were 12 minutes out and to stay inside. 12 minutes is a specific amount of time when you're waiting for something to happen. I've thought about what I did with those 12 minutes more than I've thought about almost anything else from that day. I didn't call Ray, I didn't call my mother, I didn't talk to anyone. I sat in the corner booth and I drank half the coffee that I hadn't intended to order, and I watched the truck through the window. At minute 3, a driver I didn't know came in and sat at the counter. He had the look of someone midway through a long run, efficient, purposeful, the specific kind of tired that doesn't slow you down but that you'll feel tomorrow. He ordered something fast, ate it fast, left a cash tip on the counter, and was back out the door in under 10 minutes. He never looked in my direction. He had no idea what was sitting in the cab of the Peterbilt at Pump 4, and no idea that the man sitting in the corner booth was trying to hold his face in a shape that looked like someone doing paperwork. At minute 7, a family came in. A woman with 2 kids, a boy maybe 8 and a girl younger, the kids with the depleted energy of children who have been in a car too long. The girl was carrying a stuffed animal, a rabbit, I think, or something rabbit adjacent, gray and worn in the way that beloved things get worn. She sat in the booth across from mine and looked at me with the direct, unembarrassed curiosity that small children have before they learn that staring is rude. I looked back at her. She held up the rabbit. I nodded. She seemed satisfied with that and went back to the laminated kids menu. At minute 10, I noticed that Caleb hadn't moved. He was in the seat exactly as I'd left him. Not looking at his phone, he hadn't shown me a phone at any point during the 6 hours, which I added to the list of things I'd registered without properly examining. Just sitting, looking at the windshield. The same quality of stillness as always, which I now understood as something different from what I'd understood it to be when I'd first noticed it outside Beaumont. At minute 12, the units pulled in. I thought about what Caleb had asked me. If you knew something about someone that would cause them serious trouble, but the something was old, and the person was different now, what would you do with that? The something wasn't that old. 8 months. And I didn't know if the person was different now. That's the kind of thing you can't know from a passenger seat. Not really. Not in 6 hours on the I-10. What I knew was the shape of him in that seat, the stillness, the 2 words, I think. The look at the landscape north of Columbus, 40 miles from a town he used to be from. I've met people who've done things they can't undo. You meet them on the road, sometimes in the cab, sometimes at the counter, sometimes just in the parking lot at 2 in the morning when the only people awake are the ones who have something keeping them up. They have a specific quality. Not guilt exactly. Guilt has an outward direction. It needs an audience. This is more interior than that. It's the quality of someone who has had a long conversation with themselves about something and has reached a conclusion they can live with but can't be proud of. Caleb had that quality. It didn't change what I did, but it changed what I understood about what I was doing. When the units arrived and I went to the window and watched the officers approach the truck, and watched Caleb step down with his hands already raised, and watched him turn and look at the diner window before they put him in the car, in that look, which I may not have been visible for, I thought I saw something that I've tried to name for 2 years without getting it exactly right. The closest I've come is acknowledgement, not of me specifically, of the situation, of the way things had arrived at this particular point on the map, outside a truck stop on the east side of San Antonio, on a July evening with the heat still heavy and the sky going orange in the west. He'd asked his question and gotten my answer and made his own calculation, and then he'd sat in the seat and waited. I waited until the units were out of the lot before I went back to the truck. The passenger door was still open, the way Caleb had left it when he stepped down, not swung wide, just ajar, the interior light on. I walked around the front of the Peterbilt and stood there for a moment looking at the open door and the empty seat before I reached up and pulled it closed. The latch caught. The interior light went off. The cab was mine again. I did the full pre-departure check. Every item on the list, in order, the way Ray had drilled it. Tires, lights, coupling, trailer seal. Not because I suspected anything was wrong. Nothing was wrong. But because the ritual of it was something I needed. The sequence of small, certain actions when everything else had the quality of a situation I hadn't fully processed. I pulled out of the fuel stop at 6:44 p.m. The delivery was 17 miles away. The window didn't close until 8. The math was comfortable. The drive from the Eastside fuel stop to the Sunrise distribution warehouse in San Antonio takes about 25 minutes in evening traffic. It's not highway driving, surface streets, stoplights, the particular mix of residential and commercial that you get on the edges of a city where the industrial operations haven't finished being pushed out by development. I know that drive well now. That evening, I drove it in a specific kind of silence that I've only experienced a few times since. The silence of a cab that was just occupied by someone else, where the air still has the temperature of 2 people in it instead of 1. I thought about what he'd said on the dock. Some people are built for staying, and some are built for moving. I thought about his brother in Baton Rouge, at the same job, the same neighborhood, the kind of man who stays. And I thought about Caleb on the shoulder of the I-10 outside Beaumont. No bag, no sign, needing to move and having nothing left to move with except his thumb and whatever calculation he'd been running since the warehouse fire 8 months ago. I didn't know if staying or moving was what had gotten him to that shoulder. Probably both, in the way that most situations are the product of more than one decision made over more than 1 year. The receiving dock at Sunrise had one guy on, a young man named TJ, 20s, who was clearly near the end of a long shift and did not need anything from this delivery to be complicated. I backed in clean, handed him the paperwork, watched him check the seal and sign without incident. "You're my last one tonight," TJ said. "How many you had?" 7. He handed me my copy. "Merry Christmas in July." "Same to you." I pulled out of the dock, parked in the lot, and completed my log. Time of delivery, 7:19 p.m. Load status, delivered intact, no exceptions. Under remarks, I wrote, "Standard delivery, no incidents." I sat with that for a moment. Then I closed the log, started the engine, and drove back to the Lone Star Yard. I've driven the I-10 between Houston and San Antonio maybe 60 times since that July. I know that road the way you know a road you've put real miles on. The grades, the wind patterns, the specific quality of the light at different hours. I know the truck stop in Columbus where Gloria works, though I haven't spoken to her again. I know the rest area near Seguin where the troopers were parked that afternoon. I know the fuel stop on the east side of San Antonio, the pumps I use, and the corner booth in the diner where the signal is good and you can see the lot through the window. Ray retired last year. I got a text from a dispatcher at Lone Star who knew we'd worked together. I called Ray to say something about it and we talked for about 8 minutes, which for Ray is a long conversation. He asked how my logs were. I told him clean. He said good. That was most of it. I'm not a novice anymore. I know what my hands do and what my eyes catch and where my attention goes on a long run. I know when something is off about a situation before I can articulate what it is. I know the difference between the stillness of a man at rest and the stillness of a man working very hard at being still. I'm not sure that knowledge makes me feel safer. It makes me feel more honest, which is different. The Peterbilt I was driving that July is not the truck I drive now. Lone Star retired it last spring. High mileage, a transmission issue that made the repair cost not worth it. Somewhere there's a Peterbilt 379 that's been through more than most trucks its age, with 48,000 miles on a life that started before me and will end after me, carrying the miles of everyone who drove it without acknowledgement. That's the nature of equipment. It outlasts the moments. The passenger seat carries nothing. That's not poetic. It's mechanical. The seat foam compresses and returns. The fabric holds no impression. The position resets when you adjust it. Whatever Caleb Broussard left in that cab, he left it in me, not in the equipment. That's where it still sits, in the specific quality of attention I give to the shoulder of a highway when I see someone standing there, in the way I note the CB transmission about blue and white before I've consciously decided to note it, in the question I ask myself on long, quiet runs, somewhere in the thin gold light west of Columbus. What would I do with that? I still don't have a better answer than the one I gave him. Depends on what the something was. The road is still asking, if you made it all the way to San Antonio with me, thank you. Leave a comment. I've been asking for 2 years, and I still don't know if I made the right call in the way that actually matters. The legal call and the right call aren't always the same road. Hit subscribe before you go, because the next story comes from a completely different part of this country, in weather that's nothing like Texas in July, with a driver who's been on this road long enough to know things I'm still learning. You don't want to miss that one. Roll safe, watch the shoulder.